remember every detail of that moment with the kind of clarity that comes only from pure, primal terror. The way the air seemed to thicken, becoming heavy with the stench of wet fur and decay. The unnatural silence, as every cricket, every early bird, every living thing in my backyard went quiet at once. The way my coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound impossibly loud in the stillness. And those eyes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what led up to that morning. Why I was living alone in a house on the edge of land between the lakes. And why what I saw wasn't just impossible. It was something that had been waiting for me. Something that had been watching long before I ever saw it. The locals here have a saying, the lakes have their own hunger. I used to think it was just another piece of rural folklore, like the stories of missing hikers and mysterious screams in the night. Now I know better. Now I know why the previous owners of my house disappeared without taking a single possession. Why my cameras keep dying at exactly 5:27 a.m. every morning. Why my cats won't come into my bedroom anymore. This isn't just a story about what I saw that morning. It's about what saw me back, and what's been hunting me ever since. I moved to Kentucky in January 2017, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only place that would hire me. After 15 years as a wildlife photographer for National Geographic, a messy divorce, and an even messier drinking problem, I found myself taking contract work, photographing deer populations for the state's Department of Fish and Wildlife. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd gone from shooting tigers in India to counting whitetails in Kentucky. The house I bought was cheap, even by local standards. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and 5 acres backing up to the land between the lake's recreation area. The realtor kept emphasizing the privacy and natural setting, but I could read between the lines. Nobody wanted to live this close to LBL, not after what happened to the Miller family in '98, or the hiking group that vanished in 2005. My cats Shadow and Luna came with me from Chicago. They were all I had left after Sarah took everything else in the divorce. "You care more about your cameras than you do about me," she'd said on her way out. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's why I didn't notice the signs right away. The first week was uneventful. I unpacked, set up my home office, and tried to ignore the way the house creaked at night. Old houses make noise. That's what I told myself when I heard the scratching outside my bedroom window. That's what I repeated when I found deep gouges in the wooden fence posts, too high up for any normal animal. I'd always been the rational one. The skeptic. When other photographers swapped stories about mysterious creatures they'd glimpsed through their lenses, I'd roll my eyes and order another drink. But something about this place got under your skin. The way the fog rolled in from the lakes at dawn, thick and unnatural. The way shadows seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. My first assignment was simple enough. Document deer movement patterns near the northern recreation area. I set up trail cameras at designated spots, making note of the GPS coordinates. Standard procedure. But when I checked the footage that first week, something was off. The timestamps would jump. Sometimes hours would be missing, and in every gap, there were these strange distortions in the audio, like something breathing but not quite right. I blamed it on equipment malfunction. Bought new cameras. Same thing happened. And then the dreams started. The dreams always started the same way. I'd be setting up my cameras in the woods just like any other day, but the trees would be wrong somehow. Twisted and black, their branches reaching down like grasping fingers. The air would get thick, like trying to breathe underwater, and I'd hear something moving behind me. Something big. I never turned around in these dreams. I couldn't, but I knew it was there, watching, waiting. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, and my cats would be pressed against the bedroom door, growling at something I couldn't see. During the day, I'd tell myself it was just stress, post-divorce depression. The bottle of Jack Daniels I'd been nursing every night probably didn't help. But even in my alcohol-hazed rationalization, I couldn't explain away everything. Like the smell. It started about 3 weeks after I moved in. This overwhelming stench of wet dog and something else. Something older and fouler. It would come and go, always strongest at dawn and dusk. The local animal control guy said it might be a coyote marking its territory, but coyotes don't leave prints 16 inches long, with claws that cut half an inch into solid ground. I started taking photos of the prints, telling myself it was just professional curiosity. But every time I tried to upload them to my computer, the files would be corrupted, just static and darkness where the images should be. The same thing happened with my trail cameras. Hours of normal footage, then blackness, then that goddamn breathing sound. Sarah used to say I had a self-destructive streak, said I'd rather face down a charging rhino than deal with my own problems. Maybe that's why I stayed, even after the neighbors started warning me. Old Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down brought me a pie and a warning. The lakes have their own hunger, she'd said, her roomy eyes fixed on something beyond my shoulder. They take what they want. The Millers learned that. Poor Jenny Miller, she saw something that last morning. Tried to tell people. Nobody believed her, of course, until they found their house empty, breakfast still warm on the table. I nodded and thanked her for the pie, which went straight into the trash. I didn't want to hear about the Millers or any other local legends. I was here to do a job, make enough money to get back on my feet, maybe rebuild some of what I'd lost when Sarah left. But at night, lying in bed, listening to the sounds of the woods behind my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something out there was listening back, waiting. And sometimes in that space between sleeping and waking, I could swear I heard something walking on 2 legs, circling my house, testing the windows. The cats knew. Animals always know. Shadow and Luna stopped going near the windows at night. They'd sit in the hallway, staring at my bedroom door, their eyes wide and unblinking. Sometimes they'd arch their backs and hiss at empty air, their fur standing on end. I started drinking more heavily in those weeks. Not that I needed much of an excuse. The divorce had already pushed me halfway down that bottle, but now instead of drinking to forget Sarah, I was drinking to silence the growing dread that crept in with the sunset, to ignore the way the darkness seemed to press against my windows, thick and alive. My work started suffering. The state wildlife department wanted explanations for the corrupted footage, for the missing data. How do you tell your boss that something is systematically destroying your equipment, that whatever it is seems to know exactly when and where you've placed each camera? Listen, Eric, my supervisor Dave had said during one particularly tense meeting. I know you've got a great reputation from your National Geographic days, but we need results, not excuses about equipment failure. I wanted to show him the prints I'd found, the ones that looked almost human but weren't. The ones that appeared in places where no animal should have been able to reach. But I'd been down that road before, back in Chicago. That's how I lost my job at the magazine, trying to convince my editor about something I'd seen in the Bolivian jungle, something that had walked on 2 legs and torn apart a full-grown jaguar like it was made of paper. The thing about being a photographer is that people expect you to have proof, pictures, or it didn't happen, right? But some things don't want to be photographed. Or maybe they do, but only on their terms. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything. The strange sounds at night. The way the air would sometimes get so thick it felt like drowning. The increasing frequency of those corrupted files. Looking back at those entries now, I can see how it was building up to something. Like a predator, slowly tightening the circle around its prey. February 12th, found more prints today, bigger than before, leading right up to my bedroom window. The glass was fogged up from the outside, like something had been breathing on it. February 13th, shadow won't stop growling at the woods. Luna disappeared for 6 hours, found her hiding in the crawlspace, shaking. She won't let me touch her. February 14th. Valentine's Day. Sarah called, wanted to know if I was okay, said I sounded different. While we were talking, all the power in the house went out. When it came back on, there were scratches on the inside of my bedroom door. The nights got longer, even though winter was supposed to be ending. Or maybe they just felt longer because I'd stopped sleeping. I'd sit in my living room, staring out at the woods, a glass of whiskey in one hand and my useless camera in the other. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement in the tree line, something too tall to be a deer, too fluid to be a bear, and always that feeling of being watched. Not just watched, studied. Like something was taking notes, learning my patterns, my weaknesses, testing my reactions. The morning it finally showed itself, I'd been awake for nearly 40 hours. Insomnia had become my constant companion, along with the half-empty bottle of Jack that seemed to follow me from room to room. My hands had developed a constant tremor, from the lack of sleep, the alcohol, or the fear. I couldn't tell anymore. I remembered checking my phone, 5:23 a.m. The pre-dawn darkness pressed against my windows like black velvet, and the woods behind my house were unusually quiet. Even the usual chorus of early morning birds was absent. In my sleep-deprived state, I'd started talking to myself, carrying on conversations with the empty rooms. "Just need some coffee," I muttered, shuffling toward the kitchen. "Get some caffeine in your system. Everything will make sense." The lies we tell ourselves when reality starts to crack around the edges. My cats were in their usual spot in the hallway, both frozen in that unnatural stillness they'd adopted lately. As I passed them, Luna let out a low, desperate sound. Not quite a meow, more like a warning. I ignored her, like I'd been ignoring all the warnings. The coffee maker hummed to life, its familiar gurgling almost comforting in its normalcy. I leaned against the counter, pressing my forehead against the cool surface of a cabinet. Behind me, the bay window overlooked my backyard, where the morning mist was rolling in from the direction of the lakes. 5:27 a.m. The coffee maker sputtered its last drops. 5:28 a.m. Something changed in the quality of the silence. 5:29 a.m. The mist in my backyard began to move wrong, swirling against the wind in a way that mist shouldn't move. And then, at 5:30 a.m., I made the mistake of looking up. The thing about horror is that your mind tries to process it through familiar filters. That's why, for one absurd moment, I thought someone was standing in my backyard wearing a Batman costume. But as my eyes adjusted, as my brain struggled to make sense of what it was seeing, that comforting delusion shattered. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its shoulders hunched at angles that would break a human spine. Dark fur covered its massive frame, but not like any animal fur I'd ever photographed. This was something else, something that seemed to absorb the pre-dawn light rather than reflect it. And its eyes, those eyes held an intelligence that froze the breath in my lungs, yellow-green with vertical pupils, like a cat's eyes, but wrong. So wrong. They weren't just looking at me. They were reading me, dissecting every fear and weakness I'd ever tried to hide. In that moment, I understood what prey feels like in those final seconds before the kill. The coffee cup slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering on the floor. The sound should have startled the creature, should have made it flee like any normal animal. Instead, its head tilted slightly, and I felt something brush against my mind. A presence, alien and cold, carrying with it an amused malevolence that made my knees buckle. I could easily come through that house and tear you up. The words weren't spoken. They simply appeared in my head, accompanied by vivid images of exactly how it would happen. I saw myself being torn apart, watched my own death from the creature's perspective, felt its satisfaction at my terror. The worst part wasn't the violence of the images, it was the casual nature of them, like it was sharing a mildly interesting thought about the weather. Then it smiled. Not with its mouth, though God, what a mouth it had, filled with teeth that would make a wolf's look dainty. But with its mind. A psychic grin that reeked of ancient evil and patient hunger. This thing had been old when the first humans crawled out of caves, and it wanted me to know that. I'd spent my career photographing predators. I'd stood my ground against charging elephants, stared down lions, waited out aggressive silverbacks. But this was different. This was wrong on a fundamental level. Like finding a corpse in your bed or hearing your dead mother's voice on the phone. It violated everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The stench hit me then. Rot and wet fur and something else. Something that reminded me of the time I'd found a dead dog under my childhood home. The smell filled my kitchen, so thick I could taste it, coating my tongue with the flavor of decay. Suddenly the creature's head snapped toward the woods. A low growl emanated from its chest, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. When its gaze returned to me, the pressure in my head intensified. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was beyond fear, floating in a state of horrified awe. This was what primitive humans must have felt when they encountered their first gods. I thought hysterically. This was the moment when the comfortable lies of civilization fell away, revealing the ancient truths underneath. The smile in my mind widened, and then it was gone. Just gone. No movement, no sound, just empty air where it had stood. But the smell remained, and so did the weight of its presence in my mind, like a thumbprint on my consciousness. I stood there for what felt like hours, coffee spreading across the floor around my bare feet, my breath fogging the window. The rational part of my brain, the part that had helped me survive divorce and career collapse, tried desperately to make sense of what I'd just seen. Sleep deprivation, alcohol withdrawal, stress-induced hallucination. All perfectly logical explanations, but logic couldn't explain the wet paw prints on my back porch, each one larger than my spread hand. It couldn't explain the deep scratches in the wooden railing, or the way my cats were now hiding under the couch, making sounds I'd never heard them make before, high, keening whimpers that were almost human in their distress. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. 5:42 a.m., 12 minutes. My entire understanding of reality had unraveled in 12 minutes. The first thing I did was take pictures of the prints and scratches. The second thing I did was throw up in the kitchen sink, my body finally reacting to what my mind was still trying to process. When I checked my phone afterward, the photos were gone. Not deleted, just gone, as if I'd never taken them. "Fuck," I whispered, then louder. "Fuck!" The sound of my own voice startled me. It seemed wrong somehow, too small and insignificant after what had just happened. I needed a drink. No. I needed several drinks. I grabbed the bottle of Jack from the counter and took a long pull, not even bothering with a glass. The whiskey burned going down, but it didn't help. Nothing could wash away the memory of those eyes, that smile, the casual way it had shown me my own death. Sarah had always said I had a self-destructive streak, but what she never understood was that self-destruction was sometimes the only rational response to an irrational world. I'd seen something impossible, something that shouldn't exist, and now I had two choices. I could run, or I could stay and try to understand it. The smart choice would have been to run, pack up my cats, my cameras, and whatever was left of my sanity, and drive until land between the lakes was just a bad memory in my rearview mirror. But as I stood there, whiskey burning in my gut, I knew I wouldn't leave. Couldn't leave. Because it had chosen me. Out of all the houses, all the people in this area, it had chosen to reveal itself to me. And somewhere in my alcohol-soaked, terror-rattled brain, a terrible thought began to form. Maybe this was what I'd been waiting for all along. Maybe this was why my life had fallen apart, why I'd ended up here in this house at this moment. The sun was rising now, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise. In the growing light, my backyard looked normal again, but I knew better now. I knew what waited in the shadows, what watched from the woods, and I wanted to see it again. The first dead animal appeared 3 days after the encounter. I found it on my morning walk to check the trail cameras, what was left of a deer, arranged in a way that made me empty my stomach into the underbrush. 20 years of wildlife photography hadn't prepared me for this. The doe had been opened, not torn apart like a normal predator kill, but deliberately dissected. Organs laid out in a precise pattern around the carcass. The head was positioned to face my house, jaws broken and spread wide in a grotesque parody of a smile. But worst of all were the eyes. They weren't missing or eaten. They were just wrong. Like something had reached inside and twisted the life out of them. I knew it was meant for me. A message. A promise. The police officer who responded to my call looked bored. "Coyotes," he said, not even bothering to get close. "Been seeing a lot of weird kills lately." "Coyotes don't do this," I insisted, pointing at the methodical arrangement. "Look at the precision of these cuts. Look at how the spine..." "Mr. Harrison," he cut me off. "I understand you're new here, but we get calls like this all the time. Land between the lakes has its share of predators. Best not to overthink it." But I couldn't stop overthinking it, especially not that night, when the scratching started. Luna and Shadow knew something was wrong. They'd stopped eating, spending their days huddled together in corners, eyes fixed on things I couldn't see. That night, Luna started making a sound I'd never heard before. Not a meow or a hiss, but a low, continuous whine that raised every hair on my body. I didn't sleep. How could I? The scratching continued until dawn, and with it came that smell again. Decay, and wet fur, and something else. Something that made my primitive brain want to curl up and die. When morning finally came, I found fresh claw marks on every outside wall of my house, each set exactly 6 feet up from the ground. It was watching me document them. I could feel it. The next few days became a blur of sleepless nights and whiskey-dulled days. The scratching continued, but changed, sometimes right outside my bedroom, sometimes in the attic, sometimes seeming to come from inside the walls themselves. I started taking photos obsessively, but they all showed the same thing. Nothing. Just empty frames or corrupted files, as if reality itself was being edited. A week after the deer incident, I woke to silence. The usual morning birds were quiet, and even the constant hum of insects had ceased. Something felt wrong. That primitive instinct that tells you there's a predator in your den. The air felt thick, carrying that now familiar stench, but stronger. Fresher. It had been inside. I found it in the kitchen. At first, my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. There was just red. Red on the white tiles. Red on the cabinets. Red dripping from the ceiling fan, which was running on low, spreading tiny droplets in a perfect circle. In the center of my kitchen table was something small and wet and wrong. My brain tried to categorize it. A piece of meat? A child's toy? The morning light through the window caught it just so, and I saw the familiar pattern of black and white fur, now matted with— No. The collar lay next to it. Luna's collar. the little bell still attached, now silent, the room tilted. I grabbed the counter to steady myself, but my hand slipped in something wet. When I looked up, written on my ceiling, in what I desperately tried to pretend wasn't blood, were the words, "Watching you sleep." The ceiling fan continued its lazy rotation, spreading Luna across my kitchen like a twisted sprinkler system. Each droplet that hit my face felt like an accusation. I should have protected her, should have seen this coming. Shadow was nowhere to be found, just gone, like he'd never existed. But I knew, God, how I knew, that this was just the beginning, that I'd be finding pieces of him for days to come, carefully placed where I couldn't miss them. I didn't call the police this time. What would I say? That something had broken into my house, systematically dismembered my cat, and used her blood to leave me a message? That I could feel it watching me even now, enjoying my horror, feeding off my growing madness. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table until sunset, the ceiling fan painting me with tiny red dots, while somewhere in the woods behind my house, something smiled. That night, the whiskey didn't help. Nothing helped. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, a baseball bat across my knees, watching red droplets dry on my clothes. The ceiling fan was still turning in the kitchen. I couldn't bring myself to turn it off. The soft whirring had become a kind of demented metronome, keeping time with my disintegrating sanity. The message on the ceiling had started to drip, forming new patterns. Sometimes, when I looked quickly, the drip seemed to spell different words, different threats. But that was impossible, right? Just like it was impossible for something to get inside my locked house. Impossible for it to perform such precise surgery without making a sound. I kept seeing movement in my peripheral vision, dark shapes sliding along the walls, always just out of sight. The house creaked and settled, normal sounds that now carried sinister weight. Every noise could be footsteps. Every shadow could hide teeth and claws. Around midnight, my phone rang. Sarah's name on the caller ID. Eric? Eric, are you there? Her voice sounded wrong. Just slightly off, like a record played at the wrong speed. Sarah. Eric, why did you let this happen? Why didn't you protect them? The voice was changing as it spoke, becoming deeper, rougher. I threw the phone across the room, but the voice continued, now coming from everywhere and nowhere. Should have run, Eric. Should have left when you had the chance. But you wanted to see me again, didn't you? Wanted proof. Well, now you'll get all the proof you can handle. The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, I heard something moving in the kitchen. The ceiling fan had stopped. Wet, sliding sounds replaced its whir. Something was gathering up Luna's remains, and I knew with sick certainty, that I would find them arranged differently somewhere else in the house. A new message, a new horror. I ran down the hall to my bedroom, slamming the door, pushing my dresser against it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage it. The darkness pressed against my windows like a living thing, and somewhere in that darkness, I heard Shadow crying. But it wasn't Shadow, couldn't be Shadow, because the cry kept changing, becoming more human, more like a child's sob, then like Sarah's voice again, calling my name. I sat up, looking for the source of the sound, and loved finding Chloe standing near me. I spent that night huddled in the corner of my bedroom, the baseball bat clutched to my chest like a child's security blanket. The crying continued, shifting through voices I knew. Sarah, my mother, even my own voice calling for help. Sometimes it seemed to come from right outside my door, sometimes from inside my closet, and once, terrifyingly, from right behind my ear. Dawn brought no relief. The morning light revealed new horrors, bloody paw prints leading to my bed, each one morphing from animal to human and back again. On my pillow, I found Shadow's collar, wrapped around something small and wet that I refused to examine too closely. My phone was full of photos I didn't remember taking, pictures of me sleeping, taken from different angles inside my room. In each one, you could just make out something standing in the shadows, watching. Something tall and wrong, its outline blurring as if reality itself couldn't quite contain it. I tried calling Sarah again, needing to hear her real voice, to anchor myself to something normal. The call went through, but all I heard was that wet, sliding sound from the kitchen, followed by a low laugh that made my bladder go weak. The bathroom mirror showed me what 3 days without sleep looked like. Sunken eyes, skin gray and sagging, hair matted with sweat. Or was it matted with blood? The reflection kept changing when I wasn't looking directly at it, showing me something else standing behind me, grinning with too many teeth. I started talking to myself, keeping up a constant stream of consciousness, as if words could ward off the madness. Not real. Not real. Just exhaustion. Just grief. Just the beginning. Something whispered back in Sarah's voice. The walls of my house seemed to pulse now, breathing in and out like a living thing. I found claw marks on the inside of locked doors, messages carved into surfaces that had been smooth moments before. The words made no sense, or rather, they made too much sense, revealing truths about reality that no human mind was meant to comprehend. And always, that feeling of being watched. Not just watched, studied, like a scientist observing a lab rat in a maze, noting down every twitch, every breakdown, every small surrender to terror. I found the first piece of shadow on a Wednesday. It was sitting on my desk, next to my laptop, arranged with the kind of precision you'd see in a museum display. A single paw, cleaned to the bone, positioned as if it were reaching for my keyboard. Next to it was a USB drive I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I plugged it in. The screen flickered, then filled with footage from my own trail cameras, but not the corrupted files I'd been getting. These were clear, perfect, too perfect. They showed me setting up cameras in the woods, completely unaware of the thing standing behind me. In every shot, it was there, getting closer, more defined. Its head always turned toward the camera, that same psychic smile burning through the screen. The final video was from inside my house. From last night, it showed me huddled in the corner of my bedroom, muttering to myself, while something huge and dark stood over my bed, watching. Just watching. For hours, the timestamp showed it had stayed there until 5:29 a.m. I slammed the laptop shut, but not before catching a glimpse of movement in its reflection, something rising up behind me, its breath hot on my neck. I spun around. Nothing. Just my empty office, with new claw marks on the ceiling. The second piece of shadow arrived that afternoon. I found it in the shower, carefully balanced on the faucet. The water ran red for hours. The third piece was in my coffee maker the next morning, turning my morning brew into something thick and unspeakable. Each piece came with a new message carved into nearby surfaces. Getting closer. Almost time. Do you feel it yet? The neighbors stopped responding to my increasingly desperate calls. The police blocked my number after my 6th report of impossible creatures and psychic attacks. The wildlife department sent me a formal termination letter, citing erratic behavior and failure to provide usable documentation. I started boarding up windows, only to find the boards torn down from the inside. I set up security cameras, only to have them show me things that couldn't possibly be real. Versions of myself walking through the house at night, having conversations with something in the shadows. In some footage, I appeared to be changing, more like, no, that was the madness talking, had to be. The transformation videos became more frequent. Each morning I'd review the security footage, watching myself pace the halls at night, talking to shadows. My movements became more fluid, less human. Sometimes, in the infrared footage, my eyes would reflect light like an animal's. I stopped looking in mirrors after I noticed the changes. Small things at first. My teeth seemed sharper, my nails thicker. But it was my eyes that terrified me most. They were changing color, developing that same sickly yellow-green tint I'd seen in the creature's gaze. When I finally smashed all the mirrors in the house, the shards seemed to laugh at me. The house itself was transforming. The walls wept a black, viscous fluid that smelled like rot. The floors creaked with purposeful movement, as if something vast was shifting beneath them. Every surface I touched felt wrong, too soft, too organic, like I was living inside something alive. One night I found myself in the kitchen, not remembering how I got there. The ceiling fan was running again, though I hadn't fixed the power since that first night with Luna. The blood was fresh, forming new patterns. Becoming, accepting, joining. I tried to scream, but what came out was more like a howl. The neighbors must have heard something because the police finally came. I remember their flashlights cutting through my windows, their voices calling out. But by then the house had become something else, a living extension of the creature's will. The officers' voices turned to screams, then silence. I found their badges the next morning, covered in something I refused to identify. Sarah tried to reach me one last time. A real call this time, I think. She sounded scared. She never gave me again. Herrick, people are worried. They say you've lost it, that you're hurting animals, that you killed your own cats. Please, I hung up. Had to. Because while she was talking, I caught my reflection in the TV screen. Something was standing behind me, its massive form merging with my shadow. And I was smiling. That same terrible, psychic smile I'd seen that first morning. The worst part wasn't the physical changes, or the isolation, or even the constant psychological torture. It was the growing realization that some part of me was starting to understand the creature's language, those impossible symbols it carved into my walls, the meaning behind its elaborate displays of violence. Like a cancer of comprehension spreading through my mind, replacing human thoughts with something older, darker. Last night, I found myself standing in my backyard at 3 a.m. No memory of how I got there. My bare feet were bleeding from walking through broken glass, but I couldn't feel the pain. What I could feel was the woods, breathing, watching, waiting. The trees seemed to pulse with a dark heartbeat that matched my own. I stood there for hours, swaying slightly while something moved in circles around me. Not touching, just herding, guiding, teaching. Each circuit it made brought it closer, its form becoming more solid, more real. The air grew thick with that familiar stench of decay, but now it smelled almost right. When I finally stumbled back inside, my kitchen table held a new display. At first I thought it was another piece of shadow, but no, this was different. Fresh. I recognized the Johnson's German Shepherd from 2 houses down. What was left of it had been arranged into a kind of diagram, its organs forming patterns that made a terrible kind of sense to whatever I was becoming. I found myself studying the arrangement, tilting my head at the same angle I'd seen the creature use. The pattern spoke to something primitive in my brain, teaching me things no human was meant to know. I understood now why it had killed my cats the way it did, not just for torture, but for instruction. My phone rang again. Sarah. This time, when I answered, my voice didn't sound human anymore. You were right, I growled, the words feeling wrong in my changing mouth. I do care more about my cameras than you. Want to see what they've been capturing? I sent her the footage, all of it. The transformation videos, the night recordings, the thing in my house that was less and less distinguishable from my own shadow. Her screams when she opened the files were satisfying. God help me, they were satisfying. The sun is rising now as I write this. 5:27 a.m. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely hold the pen, and my nails keep catching on the paper, leaving deep gouges. The changes are accelerating. I can feel it in my bones, which crack and shift with every movement. My teeth ache with new growth, and my vision has gone sharp and strange. I can see things moving in dimensions that shouldn't exist. 5:28 a.m. Something is coming up the stairs. Something big. But I'm not afraid anymore. How can I be when I'm becoming just like it? 5:29 a.m. The door is opening. I can smell its power, its age, its hunger. My hunger. 5:30 a.m. Time for my next lesson. I found the notebook 3 days later, crammed under my bed, pages stained with something dark and sticky. My handwriting deteriorated as the entries progressed, becoming more erratic, less human. The final pages were just claw marks and symbols that hurt my eyes to look at. The memories of those 3 days exist only in fragments, like a broken mirror reflecting nightmares. I remember running through the woods on all fours, my spine cracking and reforming with each bound. Remember the taste of something warm and struggling. Remember howling at the moon with a voice that used to scream in terror at such sounds, like a tear. But most clearly I remember the teaching. The creature, my mentor now I suppose, would leave lessons for me, each more grotesque than the last. The Miller family's missing dog, arranged in a pentagram of its own entrails. The Petersons' prize-winning cats, their bodies twisted into shapes that spoke of ancient geometries. Each killing was a letter in an alphabet of atrocity, spelling out truths that stripped away my humanity piece by piece. I tried fighting it at first, tried locking myself in the bathroom with my father's old service revolver pressed against my temple, but my fingers wouldn't pull the trigger. Instead, I found myself using the gun's reflection to watch the changes in my face, the way my jaw extended, how my teeth pushed through bleeding gums in new configurations, the way my eyes had fully transformed into those terrible yellow-green orbs that had first haunted my nightmares. The police came again yesterday, not local this time, state investigators, following up on the missing pets, the strange noises, the neighbors' complaints about screams in the night. I answered the door wearing sunglasses and long sleeves to hide the fur that was now growing in patches across my body. "Mr. Harrison," the lead investigator said, "we've had some disturbing reports." I could smell their fear, their sweat, their delicious vulnerability, could hear their hearts beating faster as they took in my too tall frame, the way I seemed to loom over them without meaning to. The younger officer's hand kept twitching toward his gun. Smart boy, but too late. They found nothing in their search of the house, of course. The creature had taught me well how to hide evidence in places that existed between spaces, in angles that human eyes slid right past. They didn't see the walls pulse, didn't notice how the shadows followed them with hungry intent, didn't realize they were being hunted. After they left, I vomited up bones I didn't remember swallowing. The changes were accelerating now. Last night I caught my reflection in a window. My spine had elongated, forcing me to hunch, and my fingers had grown into curved talons that left deep grooves in everything I touched. But it was my face that truly showed how far I'd fallen. The skin had drawn tight across reshaping bones, my nose and jaw pushing forward into something that was neither human nor animal, but some horrible combination of both. Sarah kept calling, each message more desperate than the last. "Eric, people are disappearing. The police were asking about you. What's happening? Please, just talk to me." I wanted to answer, to warn her to stay away, but when I picked up the phone, All that came out was that wet, sliding sound and a low laugh that made the walls vibrate. Was that me laughing, or the thing I was becoming? The line between us grew blurrier with each passing hour. The hunger was the worst part. Not just physical hunger, though, God, that was terrible enough, but a deeper, darker appetite, a craving for fear, for suffering, for the moment when hope died in a victim's eyes. I found myself stalking the neighbors' houses at night, watching families through windows, imagining how their screams would taste. This morning, I woke to find my bed covered in fresh blood and fur. Not mine. Not anymore. In my kitchen, the remains of something small and once human had been arranged in that familiar educational pattern. I stared at it for hours, understanding more with each passing moment. The creature was teaching me a new language, written in sinew and bone, and I was becoming fluent. The transformation is almost complete. I can feel it in my bones, which crack and reform with every movement. My humanity slips away like water through clawed fingers. The hunger grows. The neighborhood cats have gone quiet. They know what's coming. My mentor watches from the shadows, pleased with its students' progress. Time for another lesson. Time to hunt. The hunt began that night. Not like before. This was different, purposeful. The creature wanted me to prove myself, to show what I'd learned. I remember moving through the darkness with a grace that should have been impossible for my twisted form. Each movement a study in predatory perfection. The Martinez family had a teenage daughter who liked to sneak out at night. She never saw me coming, never had a chance to scream. The creature watched from the tree line as I... God, I can still taste her terror. The worst part wasn't what I did to her. The worst part was how good it felt, how right. Each cut, each tear, each arrangement of flesh and bone felt like solving a puzzle I'd been struggling with my whole life. The creature's approval washed over me in waves of dark pleasure, its psychic smile merging with my own. When I finished, what remained of her told a story in that ancient language of violence, a story about transformation, about becoming, about hunger. I left her arranged on her family's front porch, a message and a warning. The creature taught me that terror needs an audience, needs witnesses to spread the fear, to feed the legend. By morning, her discovery would send ripples of horror through the community. By nightfall, that horror would become a feast. Back in my house, I caught a glimpse of myself in a broken mirror shard. My face was wrong. Not just the physical changes, the elongated jaw, the yellow eyes, the fur, but something deeper, something in my expression that spoke of ancient evil and patient hunger. I recognized that look. It was the same one I'd seen on the creature that first morning. Sarah's final voicemail came at dawn. Eric, I saw the news about the Martinez girl. They're saying animals did it. But I know. Somehow I know it was you. What happened to you? What are you becoming? I played her message again and again, savoring the fear in her voice. Each tremor, each catch in her breath was like wine to my transformed senses. I found myself wondering how she would taste, how her screams would sound. The creature's approval radiated through my mind like a dark sunrise. The hunger never stops now. It just grows, feeding on itself, demanding more. I can hear heartbeats through walls, smell fear from miles away. I can touch the afterlife with the fingers of my hands. The creature stands behind me, its form merging with mine in the mirror. Time to hunt again. Time to teach others what I've learned about pain, about transformation. Everything about becoming. The police found the Martinez girl this morning. Their sirens painted the pre-dawn darkness in flashing red and blue, but all I could focus on was the smell of their fear. It rolled off them in waves as they discovered what I'd done, what I'd created. Their radios crackled with words like animal attack and unprecedented brutality. But they had no framework to understand what they were seeing. How could they? They were still thinking in human terms. I watched from my window as they strung up crime scene tape and brought in dogs to track the scent. The dogs went crazy when they caught my trail, howling, cowering, trying to break their leashes to run away. Smart animals. They recognized what I'd become, what was still becoming. The changes weren't just physical anymore. My mind was transforming too, expanding into dark spaces that no human was meant to comprehend. I could feel others like us out there now, moving through the shadows of the land between the lakes. A whole pack of ancient horrors, watching, waiting, hunting. And I was becoming one of them. Sarah arrived at my house around noon. I smelled her before I heard her car. Fear and concern mixed with something else, something that made my new teeth ache with hunger. She'd brought her new husband, Mike. Protection, I supposed, as if anything could protect them now. Eric, her voice trembled as she knocked. Please, we need to talk. We're worried about you. I stayed silent, watching through the curtains as she tried the door. Locked, of course. But locks wouldn't stop me anymore. Wouldn't stop what was coming. Jesus, what's that smell? Mike covered his nose. Like something died in there. Something had died in here. My humanity. I watched them through yellow-green eyes as they peered through windows, called my name, finally gave up and left. But not before I caught Sarah's expression as she glanced back at the house. She knew. Somehow, she knew what was happening to me. That night, I found another lesson waiting in my kitchen. The creature had brought me something special. A family of raccoons, arranged in a pattern that spoke of pack dynamics and hierarchy. The message was clear. I wasn't just becoming a predator. I was becoming part of something larger. Something ancient and terrible. My bones crack and reform with every movement now, but I barely notice the pain. The hunger is everything. The hunt is everything. I can hear Sarah's heartbeat from miles away. Soon, the pack is calling. Time to answer. Found myself outside Sarah's house last night. Don't remember driving there. Don't remember much of anything human anymore. Just the hunger and the knowledge that she needed to see what I'd become. The creature, my teacher, my maker, watched from the shadows as I circled her house, marking territory in that ancient way that burned the grass and left symbols that hurt human eyes to look at. Through her bedroom window, I could see her sleeping, peaceful, unaware. Mike's arm draped over her protectively. The sight triggered something, a last flicker of humanity perhaps, a memory of when that was my arm, my bed, my life. But then the hunger twisted that memory into something darker. I remembered how she'd left me, how she'd called me obsessed, unstable. Now she would understand true obsession, true instability. I left them a gift on their porch, what remained of their cat, arranged in that educational pattern I'd learned so well. But this time, I added my own flourish, used its blood to write on their door in that ancient language that only creatures like us could truly understand. The message was simple. Soon, the police came to my house again today. Different officers this time. Younger, fresher, more afraid. They had questions about Sarah's cat, about the Martinez girl, about the growing number of disappearances in the area. I met them at the door, hunched and twisted, hiding my transformed features in the shadows of my hood. Mr. Harrison, we have witnesses placing you near several of the incident sites, one officer said, trying to hide his trembling hands. We'd like you to come down to the station. I could smell their sweat, their fear, their delicious vulnerability, could hear their hearts racing as they took in my too tall frame, the way my joints bent wrong, the glimpses of yellow-green eyes beneath my hood. Their hands kept twitching toward their guns, but guns couldn't stop what I'd become. Nothing could. The transformation is almost complete. My humanity hangs by a thread. The pack moves closer, watching, waiting for my final change. Sarah needs to see. They all need to see. Time for my final lesson. Time to show them all what true horror looks like. Nevertheless, the officers never made it back to their car. I remember fragments of what happened, flashes of violence, screams cut short, the taste of... No. Some things are better left undescribed. The creature watched from the shadows, its approval washing over me in waves of dark pleasure as I arranged what remained of them in that familiar educational pattern. A message for those who would come looking. Their guns lay useless in the grass, bent and twisted like their bones. Their radios crackled with concerned voices, asking for status updates that would never come. I left their badges on my kitchen table, next to Luna's collar and Shadow's remains. A collection of trophies marking my transformation. The hunger is different now. Deeper, more focused. It's not just about killing anymore. It's about teaching. About spreading the darkness that's consumed me. Each victim is a lesson. Each death a step in a larger pattern that only creatures like us can understand. The pack moves through the shadows of land between the lakes, watching, waiting for me to complete my transformation. I found another notebook today, crammed under my bed. The early entries are in my handwriting, desperate, afraid, human. But the later pages, the symbols and patterns drawn in substances I don't want to identify, those were written by something else. Something I'm becoming. Sarah called again. One last time. Eric, I found what you left on my porch. The police say they can't find the officers who went to your house. What's happening to you? Please tell me this isn't you. Her voice cracked with fear, but underneath was something else. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition of what I'd become. What I've always been becoming. Since that first morning when I saw the creature through my kitchen window. 5:27 a.m. My bones crack and reform for the final time. The change is almost complete. 5:28 a.m. The pack circles closer, their ancient hunger merging with mine. 5:29 a.m. Sarah needs to understand. They all need to understand. 5:30 a.m. Time for the final hunt. Time to show them what true horror looks like. I can feel the creature's approval as I write these last words. Its presence fills my house, merges with my shadow, guides my clawed hand across the page. Soon, very soon, I'll go to Sarah's house. Not to kill. No, that would be too simple. I'll show her what I've become, make her understand the truth about transformation, about hunger, about the ancient horrors that prowl the edges of reality. And then, I'll teach her how to become like us. The last threads of my humanity unraveled as I made my way to Sarah's house. Each step twisted my bones further, reshaping me into something that belonged to darkness and ancient hunger. The pack followed, their shadows merging with mine, their psychic approval driving me forward. I found Mike first, in the garage. He was working late on his car. Such a normal, human thing to be doing. The look on his face when he saw what came through the door. I'll treasure that moment forever. He tried to run, tried to scream, but we're so fast now, so strong. What I did to him, the way I arranged him, it was my masterpiece. My final exam. The creature, my mentor, my maker, watched from the shadows as I worked, its ancient knowledge flowing through me. Each cut, each tear, each artistic arrangement of flesh and bone told a story of transformation, of becoming. Mike's remains would be my message to Sarah, my invitation to join us in this dark evolution. I could smell her upstairs, smell her fear as she heard the noises from the garage. She knew. Some part of her had always known what I would become. What we would all become. You can hear her heart pounding as she tries to dial 911. Poor Sarah, still thinking in human terms. The pack moves closer, eager to welcome a new member. I climb the stairs, my twisted form casting impossible shadows on the walls. Time to share my gift. Time to teach Sarah about true transformation. But something went wrong. As I reached the top of the stairs, my body contorting in ways that defied physics, I saw something in Sarah's eyes that I hadn't expected. Not fear, understanding. She stood there, calm, holding something in her hands. Something old. Something that smelled of power and ancient knowledge, different from my own. I knew this day would come, she said softly. I've been waiting. We've all been waiting. The thing in her hands began to glow, and for the first time since my transformation began, I felt fear. The light from Sarah's hands burned my transformed eyes, forcing me to recoil. But it wasn't just light. It was something older, something that spoke of different, ancient powers. The pack's shadows retreated, hissing, and I felt my mentor's presence waver for the first time. You think you're the only one who knows about the dark things in Land Between the Lakes? Sarah's voice had changed, carrying harmonics that made my new form shudder. You think you're the only one who's been chosen. The object in her hands was a book, ancient, bound in something that looked like leather but wasn't. Symbols crawled across its surface, similar to the ones I'd learned but somehow wrong. Different. As she opened it, the air itself seemed to crack and bleed. I tried to save you, Eric. That's why I left. I saw the darkness growing in you, saw how it was calling to you. But I couldn't stop it. No one can stop what's meant to be. My body tried to complete its transformation, bones cracking and reshaping. But something was fighting it. The book's power reached out, trying to tear away what I'd become. I howled, a sound that shattered windows and made reality itself tremor. The pack's voices filled my head. Kill her. Complete your transformation. Join us. But Sarah's voice cut through their chorus. You were never becoming one of them, Eric. You were becoming something else. Something they fear. 5:27 a.m. My flesh burns and reforms, caught between two ancient powers. Another consciousness rents the modern world. A power I am creating from anger. 5:28 a.m. The pack circles, uncertain now, their shadows flickering with something like fear. 5:29 a.m. Sarah begins to chant in a language that predates humanity. 5:30 a.m. Everything changes. Sarah's chanting grew louder, each syllable feeling like hooks in my twisted flesh, pulling, tearing, reshaping. The pack's howls became desperate, angry. My mentor's presence flickered like a dying flame, its confidence replaced by something I'd never felt from it before. Fear. He lied to you, Eric. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. They weren't transforming you. They were preparing you, making you ready for something else, something worse. The book's pages turned on their own, revealing symbols that made my new eyes bleed. But I could read them now, could understand their terrible meaning. They spoke of older things, darker things. Things that hunted the hunters. My body convulsed as new changes began. Not the familiar twisting of bone and sinew I'd grown accustomed to, but something deeper, more fundamental. The fur began falling from my body in clumps, revealing skin that wasn't skin at all, but something that seemed to absorb light itself. But have I? My voice was a ruined thing, caught between growl and scream. What am I becoming? Sarah's eyes held pity and horror in equal measure. What you were always meant to be. The pack didn't choose you, Eric. They were sacrificing you, preparing your body and soul for one of the old ones, something that hunts creatures like them. The pack's shadows were retreating now, their psychic screams filling my head with terror. My mentor, my deceiver, tried one last time to assert control, but its power felt weak, insignificant compared to what was flowing through me now. My flesh continues to change, becoming something that hurts reality itself. The pack flees, their ancient hunger replaced by primal fear. Sarah's chanting reaches a crescendo as the final transformation begins. I understand now. I understand everything. The final transformation wasn't just physical. It was a fundamental rewriting of everything I was, everything I could be. My consciousness expanded beyond the limits of flesh and bone, beyond the simple hunger of the pack. What filled me now was something vaster, colder, infinitely more terrible. I saw the truth then, saw how the pack had been manipulating me, preparing my body and soul through carefully orchestrated acts of cruelty and transformation. Each kill had been a ritual, each arrangement of bodies a prayer to something ancient and unspeakable. They weren't making me one of them. They were making me into a vessel. The old ones. Sarah's voice seemed to come from a great distance now. They need specially prepared hosts. The pack. They're just servants. Cultivators. They find suitable humans and break them, reshape them, make them ready for possession. My new awareness stretched across dimensions that shouldn't exist. I could see the pack fleeing through shadows that weren't shadows at all, but tears in reality itself. Could see my former mentor's true form, a pathetic, frightened thing, so much smaller and insignificant than what I was becoming. The hunger was different now, not the simple predatory urge I'd known before, but something cosmic and cold. I didn't just want to kill, I wanted to unmake, to reduce everything to fundamental particles and consume even those. The pack's violence seemed childish, amateur compared to the atrocities my new form could conceive. Reality bends around me as the old one takes full possession. Our bodies crash together. Sarah's protective spells crumble before powers older than time. I remember everything. Every life, every death, every world consumed. I am complete. I am eternal. I am horror itself. The last thing I saw with human eyes was Sarah backing away, the book falling from nerveless fingers as she finally saw what I'd truly become. Her protection spells, her ancient knowledge, all meaningless before the cosmic horror that now wore her ex-husband's transformed flesh. Eric, her voice trembled. What have you become? But Eric didn't exist anymore. What looked back at her, through eyes that were windows into oblivion, had never been human, had never been a mere werewolf. It had waited eons for this moment, for this perfectly prepared vessel, and now it was hungry. What happened next exists only in fragments, like shards of a broken mirror reflecting impossible horrors. I remember Sarah trying to run, her protective spells shattering like glass against what I'd become. Remember reality itself warping around me as I moved, space and time bending in ways that made molecular structures scream. The house collapsed inward, not from physical force, but from its proximity to something that negated the very concepts of matter and dimension. The pack's howls became distant, insignificant, like the mewling of insects before an approaching storm. They had served their purpose, these cultivators of horror. Now they would learn what true terror was. My former mentor tried to flee, but there is no escaping what I'd become. I reached out, not with physical limbs, but with appendages that existed in geometries beyond human comprehension, and simply unmade it, reduced it to its component atoms, then consumed even those. Its last psychic scream echoed across dimensions, a warning to others of its kind. Sarah was still trying to speak, trying to cast something from her book of ancient knowledge. Poor Sarah. Still thinking in terms of magic and monsters, of good and evil. What I am now transcends such simple concepts. I am the void that hungers, the darkness between stars, the thing that waits at the end of all things. Reality fractures around what was once Eric Harrison. The old one spreads its awareness across dimensions, tasting infinite horrors. Sarah's last spell fails as comprehension drives her mad. The feast begins. They found Sarah's body 3 days later, though body isn't quite the right word. What remained of her couldn't be explained by any forensic science, couldn't be understood by human minds. The investigators went mad trying to describe what they saw. The photographs they took showed only static and darkness. The land between the lakes has new legends now. Stories of something worse than werewolves or dogmen. Something that hunts the hunters. Something that unmakes reality itself. I still exist in my way. Still wear this twisted form that the pack so carefully prepared. But I am not Eric anymore. Not a werewolf. Not anything that can be named or understood. I am the thing that waits in darkness absolute. The horror beyond horror. And I am so very, very hungry. And I am so very, very hungry.